$44.6 million. Just let that number sink in for a second.
Yeah.
That's what the Stegosaurus skeleton apex went for at auction recently. Just incredible.
Absolutely staggering.
And almost right away, we heard the buyer, Kenneth Griffin, is loaning it to the American Museum of Natural History, which is great news, obviously.
Definitely a positive outcome, for sure.
But it really does highlight this whole kind of fascinating, sometimes tricky world of collecting dinosaur fossils.
It really does. You know, these incredible pieces of our planet's history, they used to be purely in the realm of science, right? Quiet study. And now they're fetching prices like famous paintings. It makes you ask, what do we value more? The status of owning it or what we could learn from it?
Exactly. So that's what we want to dig into in this deep dive. How did we even get here? How did dinosaur bones become like the ultimate luxury collectible?
And what's the real fallout from that? For the scientists, I mean, the ones trying to piece together the history of life.
Yeah. And are there ways forward, ways to maybe satisfy both sides? We've been looking at, well, the news reports, obviously, but also some scientific papers like that one in Paleontologia Electronica you mentioned, trying to get the full picture.
Right. Our mission, if you like, is to unpack the economics behind it, understand the impact on paleontology, and look at the different ideas people have for dealing with this whole situation. It's complex.
Definitely complex. So, okay, this idea that fossils have serious monetary value, when did that really take off? It wasn't always like this, was it?
No, not at all. I mean, fossils were always interesting, but the market exploding like this, that's relatively new. A few things really lined things up. You absolutely have to point to Jurassic Park back in '93.
Right, for sure. Massive impact.
Huge. It just, brought dinosaurs roaring back into popular culture for everyone, made them feel real again.
I remember that buzz. Everyone was suddenly dinosaur obsessed.
Exactly. It created this huge public fascination. But the moment that really shifted fossils into that high-end collectible category, that was the auction of Sue, the T-Rex, 1997.
Aha, yes, Sue. That was the big one.
That was the watershed, $8.4 million at Sotheby's. Before Sue, fossils were mostly about science. Any buying and selling was usually smaller stuff, not major finds.
Right.
Sue was so complete, so iconic, it just changed the perception entirely.
And suddenly, they weren't just bones anymore. They were assets, investments.
Precisely. Trophies, even. And then you get this sort of celebrity factor layered on top. Remember that story about Nicolas Cage and Leonardo DiCaprio?
Vaguely, yeah. They were bidding against each other.
For a Tarbosaurus skull back in 2007, Cage ended up paying something like $276,000 for it.
Oh, wow.
Now, that specific skull turned out to be illegally exported and had to be returned, but the story itself, it just added fuel to the fire. Big Hollywood stars fighting over a dinosaur skull. It made fossils seem even more like these ultimate luxury goods.
And the market's just ballooned since then. The figures we saw suggest it's, multi-billions globally now, though hard numbers are tough to pin down.
Yeah, it's a huge, somewhat opaque market, but undeniably massive.
Okay, let's unpack this then. So, fossils are big money. What does that actually do to the science? What's the real-world impact for researchers?
Well, the number one problem is access. Simple as that. When these really important fossils, especially the famous ones like T-Rex, go into private hands, researchers often just can't get to them.
Right.
That study we mentioned, Paleontologia Electronica, it found over half of the T-Rex fossils that would be useful for science are privately owned now.
Over half. Wow. Why is that such a disaster for scientists?
Well, think about how science works. You need to be able to look at what others have studied, right? To check their findings, maybe see something new yourself, build on previous work.
Makes sense. Verification.
Exactly. Paleontology relies heavily on comparing different specimens. If a huge chunk of the evidence, maybe the best evidence, is locked away in someone's living room or vault,
then you can't build that reliable knowledge base.
Precisely. It fragments the field, slows down progress. Imagine trying to understand human evolution if half the hominid fossils were off limits.
And it's not just any fossils either, is it? Our sources mention something specific about younger T-Rex specimens.
Yes, that's a critical point. About 20%, maybe, of those privately held T-Rex fossils are juveniles or subadults.
And those are rare.
Incredibly rare and incredibly valuable scientifically. They tell us how these giants grew, how their bodies changed, maybe even how their behavior shifted as they matured.
So losing access to those is a particular blow.
A huge blow. It hampers our ability to understand the entire life cycle of these animals.
That's just be immensely frustrating for museums, too.
Yeah.
I mean, how can they possibly compete at auction against billionaires?
They generally can't. Museums run on tight budgets, grants, donations.
Yeah.
They're just not playing in the same league financially.
Yeah.
So you end up with a situation where potentially vital scientific data is lost to research purely because of money.
It's such a change from how things used to work, isn't it? The information we saw suggested that, before Sue, landowners might just let scientists come dig on their property.
Often, yes. There was a different relationship. Maybe they'd get a mention in a paper or just the satisfaction of contributing. But once people realized these things could be worth millions.
Everything changed. Commercial fossil hunters entered the picture.
Exactly. Offering landowners serious cash or a cut of the auction price. Museums often can't match those offers. And once a commercial outfit gets a fossil, the priority is usually selling it for the highest price, not necessarily ensuring scientific access.
Okay, so given all that, what can actually be done? We read about some pretty sweeping ideas, like banning the private trade altogether, or saying all dinosaur fossils are national property.
Those ideas are definitely out there, yeah. The logic is, take the profit motive out of it, keep these things in the public trust for study.
But that has potential problems too, right? Like driving it underground. We saw mentions of a black market, especially for dragon bones in traditional medicine.
That's the big counter-argument. A complete ban sounds good, but could it just make the trade harder to track? Maybe even lead to worse handling or destruction of fossils during illicit digs? It's a real risk.
It's tricky. And then you have cases like Apex, the stegosaurus we started with. The owner bought it, but is loaning it out. So private ownership doesn't always mean it's lost to science.
True. It shows that collaboration is possible, but it's totally reliant on the goodwill of the owner, isn't it? There's no guarantee. It's not a systemic solution.
Which kind of brings us back to Sue again.
Yeah.
That whole story was just wild. Discovered commercially. Huge legal fight over who even owned it. Then the auction. Everyone was terrified it would just vanish.
Oh, the anxiety in the scientific community was immense. Sue is such a unique, important specimen. The thought of it being inaccessible was devastating.
But it ended well, relatively speaking.
It did, thankfully. The Field Museum managed to pull together the funds, but crucially with help from big corporate partners, McDonald's, Disney, others. That was key.
Yeah, that partnership was interesting. McDonald's apparently first thought about, like, a T-Rex Happy Meal.
Yeah, that was floated. But they pivoted, thankfully, towards funding actual science education with Disney. They helped create teaching materials, sponsored the lab where Sue's bones were prepared.
Right, and they made casts for traveling exhibits. Plus, Disney put a replica in Animal Kingdom. So public access was actually huge in the end.
It was a fantastic outcome, really. A great example of public institutions and private companies coming together for science and education. But, and it's a big but.
It's not typical.
Not at all. We can't count on that kind of rescue mission every time a major fossil goes up for auction.
Which really highlights the need for something more consistent, some kind of wider rules or regulations.
Exactly. And that leads into the whole discussion about government roles and maybe even global standards. Because right now, the laws are all over the place.
Yeah, we saw that. In the U.S., find it on your land, it's basically yours.
Yeah.
But in Canada, China, Mongolia, France, they're treated more like national treasures belonging to the state.
That huge variation creates all sorts of issues, especially with international trade. It makes you wonder if we need a more common approach worldwide.
So what would something like that even look like? What could global standards realistically cover?
Well, you could imagine things like common guidelines for proper excavation, maybe clearer rules on ownership transfer internationally, and crucially, finding ways to guarantee scientific access.
How would that work? Like mandatory loan periods?
Yeah.
Or letting museums make scans or casts?
Maybe. Things like requiring high-quality 3D scans to be made available, or ensuring museums have the right to create replicas for study, even if the original stays private. Those are the kinds of mechanisms people talk about.
So what does this all mean? When you boil it down, we've got this real clash, haven't we? On one side, the incredible excitement, the glamour, the, frankly, huge money tied up in owning dinosaur fossils. And on the other, their irreplaceable value for understanding the entire history of life on Earth.
Exactly. And the real worry is that if more and more key fossils end up locked away, inaccessible, we just lose that knowledge. We lose pieces of the story, crucial pieces.
That's a sobering thought.
Yeah.
And just as a little aside, a fun fact, one of our sources mentioned, Sue, probably the most famous T-Rex ever.
Yeah.
Scientists still aren't actually sure if Sue was male or female,
Yeah.
even after all this study.
That's brilliant. It just shows, doesn't it? Even with these amazing discoveries, there's always more to learn. The science never really stops.
Which kind of leads to a final thought for you, listening in. Think about this balance. You've got property rights,
Yeah.
the thrill of collecting something amazing, but also this shared heritage, this scientific knowledge that belongs to everyone, really.
Where do we draw the line? What responsibility comes with owning such a profound piece of the past? And, what systems could we create to make sure these incredible relics keep teaching us about where we came from and maybe even where we're going?